Okay, so what's up, guys? This is the book People Fuel by Dr. John Townsend. The book here, let me give you the rating. Overall, a 9.6. It was just just a great relationship book by Dr. John Townsend. For author credibility, I gave him a 10. I mean, flat out, probably the first 10 I've given. He was just incredibly informed, and you can just tell he knew what he was talking about. Author ability, 10. How well did the author speak to the subject of the book? It was a 10. His PV connection, by far the highest I've ever given as well. I gave him a 9. How did you feel about reading this book? I felt it was a 10. I mean, I just absolutely, throughout the entire book, I loved it. It was a phenomenal book. Loved reading the whole thing from page 1 all the way through. And then recommendation for us to read it as a group, I'm going to give that a 9. Excuse me. What's up, guys? This is the book People Fuel by Dr. John Townsend. Just a great book all the way. So let me even start with just the review of the book. His credibility was a 10. His credibility was a 10. His ability to speak to the subject was a 10. You could tell the guy just knows what he's talking about, full out. Just really impressed with the way that he spoke to the subject. The PV connection was a 9. It was the highest I've ever given. Just a 9. I mean, he spoke directly to the subject, but also to what we're looking for as well. My personal feel reading the book was a 10. My recommendation was a 9. So it was a 9.6 overall. Just a dominant book when it comes to relationship concepts that we want to see ourselves. So a little bit about Dr. John Townsend. He is a business consultant, leadership coach, and psychologist. He's written 30 books, including a New York Times best-selling book called Boundaries, which is another relationship book. But he also writes leadership books and organizational books. He's a part of actually he started and founded the Townsend Leadership Group, which offers executive coaching, corporate consulting, strategic planning, team facilitations, and conference presentations. So he's all over the place when it comes to leadership. He's the guy. He's also started the Townsend Leadership Program. So he develops leaders, puts them through another organization called the Townsend Institute for Leadership and Counseling, which puts people through school. I mean, he offers his own degrees. So he's just really top notch. His website's really impressive as well. He's a co-host of the New Life Live talk show, which it has 3 million listeners. So really credible. And then he also is he's a philanthropist as well. He's a Mustard Seed Ranch, which is a residential program for abused children. So he has a very good, caring heart. He is a Christian. He went to, as I remember him talking about in his own book, he went to a seminary down in Texas and wanted to be a pastor. He went to Dallas Theological Seminary. So getting into the book a little bit with just what the book is about. He says if you want more energy, if you want to be more positive, you want to be focused, you want to have better relationships, be more productive at work, be more creative, you want to grow spiritually, emotionally, and even personally, then this book is for you. So it's just really, it covers a lot of ground, but primarily it's a relationship book. I want to read this part here, what the book offers. He says you will learn what is available for you in what are called the 22 relational nutrients. You'll see how to obtain them and use the energy they provide. And you'll learn who in your life to become closer to and who you may need more distant from you. So essentially that's exactly what the book is. There's 22 relational nutrients. Kind of he likens it to a tree that needs to grow and blossom and produce fruit. You need to be able to have nutrients that go and feed that tree, or even to the human body, as we need nutrients. We think through our health, we need nutrients to be able to produce and to be the best us. He says we need those in relationship, something that we neglect a lot. We have 22 of those, and he's worked for years and years to develop these 22 relational nutrients, which will fall into 4 different categories And so we'll talk about those in part one, the four different categories that each nutrients will fall into. He breaks them down into four different categories. And then, like he said, you'll learn who to be distant from and then who you need to get closer to. He's going to give us seven different people groups. The first few we really want to get close to, and as we go, you'll see you want to get more distant too. So let's dive into the book and let's begin with part one. On to part one, called Our Relational Foundation. So he's going to lay the foundation for really the whole book in general. And he starts out with what he calls an indispensable truth. And so he says that humans, our biggest need is to need. We need to need. We have two types of needs. Really, the first type of need is a functional need, and this is the one that we're most familiar with. We need food. We need all these things so that we can function. Food, good. I was going to say good relationships, but that's actually the second one. So we need the functional needs, like at the workplace, a job, all these different things. But the second need is we need relationships. We need positive relationships, which we tend to neglect. And so we are living with a deficit of this need. And he actually says that it's embedded into the framework of how God has set things up. God has built systems. He uses the word systems. God has built systems naturally to provide us with our needs. So we have to tap into these systems to receive these needs. And he makes the argument, and he gives even a few different Bible verses to prove this, that these needs are provided and fostered through relationships. So we have to be very intentional about relationships. He talks about the sourcer and the sourcee. The sourcer is the one providing the need for someone else in a relationship, and then the sourcee is the one receiving the need in relationship. And he says we naturally, especially in our culture, we naturally gravitate to being the sourcer because it makes us feel stronger. Being the sourcee makes us feel weaker. So that's already, we're playing with a disadvantage just in our culture and the way that we go about doing things. So he automatically he initially sets out this challenge of become a sourcee and a sorcerer. So moving on to, once again, the whole book is about this analogy of a tree. So he talks about the fruit of the tree is the measurement. It is the measurement that we can measure our lives with to see how effective we are, to see how fruitful and happy and successful our lives are. He says that fruit, he gives three P's to describe the fruit, which once again is the measurement of our lives. The first one is personal, the second one is people, and the third one is professional. So we're able to rank ourselves through these different things. He says the professional, it's made up of four different fruit types, he calls them. The first one is behavior. It's just our actions, so we can measure through our actions. This will be very familiar to us, by the way, through our actions. The second one is our thoughts. We can measure through our thoughts. The third one, which I thought was interesting and really speaking about our systems, is our values. So we can measure through behavior, thoughts, values, which is those deep beliefs, which I believe that through the thoughts you create value. You create values if you truly believe in it, or it's cognitive dissonance. And then the fourth one in the personal fruit category would be our emotions. And so we feel a certain type of way versus even when we think. So it just, that's our equation really, absent the emotion and values. But I think we've talked about that. That's definitely what we want to be adding to it, is the emotions and our values. So the next measurement is through people. Whether you're talking about workplace or personal, we need people to be able to measure our lives. He says there's two types of fruit here, and that's vulnerability. So we feel very successful when we can constantly be vulnerable with people. And the second one is the capacity to solve relational problems. It refers to problems with relationships, so conflict resolution. So if we're able to do that, if we have that skill, then we're going to have very, very fruitful lives. Next one is performance. A life of good performance fruit is one in which we are productive and successful in the workplace realm. So just productivity system is what we need. Next point that he makes is what he calls the trunk of character. And so he talks about how a trunk in a tree, it functions first off to keep you stable on the ground, but also the nutrients in the tree that go up to the fruit so that you can have these measurements. you need a powerful trunk because it transfers those nutrients to the fruit so that the fruit can even receive the nutrients. So the trunk of character, he says, for us is going to do the exact same thing. So the four character capacities of a trunk is what he lists here. First is bonding, the ability to have deep, healthy, meaningful relationships with God and with people. Boundaries, this is our capacity to know what is and what is not yours and to take. So you just have to know those things. If you know what's right, it's kind of like Adam and Eve. You know I can't eat the apple, so don't eat it. Then if you do continue to not eat it, and even just the capacity to know that is what's going to help found and forge our character trunk. Next one is reality. There's positive and negative realities, but just even knowing what is reality is going to help us. And then fourthly and finally is capacity. The capacity is about being prepared to function in the world of adults. So he says you have to know your gifts, you have to know your talents, and then you have to have a crazy, awesome, amazing work ethic. These all will build your trunk, that character trunk. And then finally, in this part, he talks about the soil of ingredients. And so you have to have, this is pretty obvious, with a tree, you have to have a good soil that will help you to receive the nutrients as well. If you don't have good soil, then forget it. You can't grow anything. And so this all comes from God, the good soil. He talks about God provides us with three basic elements, which is our soil, which is grace. He does this vertically through relationship. This is our spiritual system, not neglecting that. Through relationship, he gives us grace vertically, but then he also through other people. We just talked about that, to fostering relationship. God setting up these systems through other people. He also gives us grace. So being in the right relationships with people is essential. Then number two is truth. I thought this was really good. Just feeding our minds with truth over and over and over will be a type of soil that we can create so that we can be successful. He says you can get truth from the Bible, you can get it from research, you can get it from experts, you can get it from feedback, but it all still comes from God. And then the last one is time. Just having the right amount of time. He says some combination of all three of these working together is how we're going to grow, is how we're going to experience transformation. So on to part two. Let's begin to talk about the nutrients themselves. Part two of this book, the nutrients. So let's get all the way into these nutrients here. This is when it gets good. You'll see. Part two, why the nutrients are vital. So he says you have to have these. I mean, you have to have these nutrients. If you don't, you pretty much develop diseases in your relationships. He talks about the difference between missing your favorite TV show versus missing iron. Iron, you develop osteoporosis, you get in trouble. He says it's a must, it's a need, and these nutrients are not something we take in once in a while, once a year, twice a year, once a month, once a week. No, they're daily. They're daily habits. They're daily things that must be practiced, must be retained. So he talks about the actual process of receiving the nutrients and how they'll lead to transformation. Psychologists and scientists call it internalization. And so internalization is where we take an idea, we internalize it emotionally so that it can be used and remembered. Remember, our memory, it creates it as a long-term memory that he talks about. He says, let me read this. He says, the body metabolizes food to create energy, strengthen itself, and heal. In the same way, we metabolize relational nutrients when we internalize them. They are converted into emotional and intellectual energy, strength, and healing. So it's the same thing as he talks about food, the process of metabolization, taking in nutrients physically, letting it be transformed into energy so that we can use it. It's the same thing in relationships. We have to internalize it emotionally so that we can then use it and become effective. So broken down into four quadrants, here are the 22 nutrients. The first one is quadrant one, be present. And so you'll see being present in this first quadrant, there'll be a certain amount of nutrients made up in this first quadrant. It's more about grace. So if you even remember the soil, it's more about giving grace and listening and talking less. Less about giving people truth, but it's more about grace. The second quadrant here is convey the good. Convey the good, convey the good. First one's be present. Second one is convey the good with people. Remember, there's the sourcer and the sourcee. So if you're talking about the sourcer, this is you're being present with people, or you're conveying the good with people. If you're the sourcee, they are being present with you. If you're receiving the nutrient, and someone else is conveying the good to you as the sourcee. So the second one is convey the good, a little more truth. You're going to be speaking a little more truth or receiving a little more truth, but also very heavy on grace, receiving someone's grace and warmth and kindness and a lot of presence as well in this quadrant of convey the good. Third one is provide reality. Provide reality. Sourcer is providing reality. Sourcee is getting reality. So providing reality, as you can even hear it right away, is just all about truth. Someone's giving you truth. You are getting truth. And so that's a lot more truth. Definitely grace still, but more truth bound. Quadrant 4 is the last one. Call to action. This is about challenge. This is heavy on truth, a lot, very little grace here, but boom, boom, boom. You're really providing this person with a lot of truth, a lot of call to action. So let's look straight into this first one. Be present is the first quadrant, being present with somebody. Communicating with people causes growth. He says endorphins are released when people know we are there for them. So just even being present in the moment for somebody, endorphins, the brain, it helps with the it helps with the endorphins in our brain to give us just a sense of belonging and peace. So the very first nutrient is acceptance, connection without judgment, he calls it. He says acceptance, actually, it's not even acceptance until someone can feel judged in the moment. So if I'm confessing something to you and I can feel like you can judge me and you actually accept me, that's true acceptance. It's not so much acceptance when you just accept me for things that we love and we relate to. There has to be this friction for you to accept me, being present, just listening to me. Number 2 is attunement. The word attunement. He says attunement, you're attuning really to someone's feeling. So it's not just listening, attunement is, but attunement is where you can feel and sense somebody's emotions. You can see they may say one thing, but you can really feel that they're going over here, and you can have empathy and compassion for those emotions, and you can go up and down with them emotionally. Is what attunement is what it's all about. Number 3, in this quadrant of being present with people, is validation. Validate the other person. He says this helps us to pay attention to our experiences and make sense of them so that we can act right. So really just paying attention to someone and validating them in that moment of being present. Number 4, identification. So this is a shared experience to show we are not the only ones going through what we are going through. So this is very close to like acceptance is I identify with you. There are words to be spoken. We're in be present, but there are words to be spoken here. So if you're struggling with something and you're being vulnerable, then it's my responsibility as the sourcer to then identify with you. To show, look, man, you're not the only one that struggles with that. I've struggled with that from time to time. It's very important here. He says the power of identification is in what they call normalization. Normalization just means you're not the only one going through what you're going through. You're not a freak. You're not a mutant. But it's a normal situation. Kind of reminds me of what Paul talks about, where we go through no temptation that's not common to man. 5th one is containment. Allows others to just vent. I love this one because even as I think about why I've been able to be effective at school in Annapolis, I believe that I do this one a lot. Containment. So it's being present in the moment and allowing people to just vent, to just go. Students will come in all the time and they'll be cussing, they'll say all these things that most teachers I think would be like, hey, shut up, or you can't say that. But I allow them to talk. And therefore they can relate very well. He talks about actually this as strength, that if you can hear someone lose it, cuss, and say all these wild things, that actually shows that you're strong enough to listen to them and they feel comfortable to vent with you. So it's very, very powerful. I love that one when I read that. There's a lot involved there, but of course we don't have time to get so deep into it. The last one in this quadrant is comfort. Comfort, it really is all about loss. So it's bearing people, it's being with people in their loss. Now you can think through loss as they lose a family member, but it also can be as shallow, if you will, as losing a promotion or losing in the day or someone saying something to them that really hurt them that day. That's a loss. So any form of loss, As a sorcerer, you need to have that ability to comfort. He says, that how do you comfort? You comfort. You let the other person lead. You move towards sadness. Instead of trying to get someone to be strong, you move towards sadness. You refrain from attempting to change their feelings, and when you do speak, attune to the sadness. Remember, attunement is all about feeling. So understand the feeling of the moment. Next quadrant: convey the good. Convey the good. We need to convey the positive realities we see in others. He says. Number 7, then, in this convey the good, is affirmation. Affirmation is noticing a quality in a person or an achievement of theirs which required effort on their part. So that one's very important. Just noticing what they did. You did something good. I need to convey it. Encouragement. I love this. It's a cure for discouragement. Encouragement is the cure for discouragement. Um, so if you think about it, you can't encourage if there's not discouragement, he says. So as soon as someone is discouraged in life, then you can bring about encouragement, which ultimately, as a result, leads to courage on the other person's part. Now, if there's no discouragement and you're encouraging, it's called affirmation. You're just affirming them, and you're providing that first one, number 7, that affirmation. Discouragement, encouragement is predicated on discouragement. Number 9, respect. This is all about honor and assigned value. So showing someone that I respect you in 3 categories: character, their choices, and just their freedom to choose. I respect for your choice. I respect what you did. I respect your character, your values, etc., etc., etc. Number 10 is hope. Hope, hope, hope. He says, while encouragement targets your present situation, hope focuses on the future. So it gives confidence for the future. You need to be providing hope and positivity. He was very heavy on this one. He was saying hope is just everything, pretty much, giving people hope, focusing on their future. Number 11, forgiveness. When we do not forgive, we run the risk of giving control to the offender. So learning how to forgive is essential. Number 12, celebration. Celebration, he says, provides 3. It has 3 purposes. It reinforces the good behavior. It connects us with others if we are celebrating something, in the moment. And then it requires that we are in the moment. It's called what he says, psychologists call mindfulness. We've talked about that in other books. Just being mindful, being aware of what's happening. And when we see good, we celebrate it with somebody else. Quadrant 3 is provide reality. This is where it begins to get a little more challenging, and you're speaking more truth than just giving grace. So the first 13 is clarification, clearing up the mud in the water. He says so. Making sure that you're clear is an essential skill here and nutrient. Number 14, perspective. It is to offer someone a different and more helpful way to view a situation, another lens to use. So instead of just providing truth and giving reality, you're also giving them a new perspective to a situation. So if someone's hurting, you might show them a different lens that they can look through it to see it, and that can really be a positive nutrient. Next one is insight. He says thoughtful people give great insight, so always giving someone an insight for their situation. 16, feedback. He says, put plainly, successful people seek out feedback. So giving people feedback. If you can't receive feedback, then we got to work on it. But successful people want feedback. So the sorcerer needs to be giving it, and sorcee needs to be seeking it. And then last one here is confrontation. This is way different than feedback. It's not way different, but it's different than feedback because feedback can be positive and negative. Confrontation tends to always be shooting at a negative thing. People don't seek out confrontation, he says, but we need to be able to provide confrontation. If you remember, conflict resolution was a big part way earlier on. You have to know how to do that with love and kindness. And then finally here, a call to action is that last quadrant, a call to action. Says number 18, let me read this first. Whether in your professional or your personal life, actions must be a part of how you change and grow. A call to action you can't transform without a call to action. So number 18, advice, recommending a course of action. He says there's 2 things to remember. Just get permission before you give people advice. And then you also need to determine, does this person need attunement? If you remember in the first quadrant, Attunement was all about attuning to someone's feeling. Do they need attunement before they need advice? So you need to ask those questions before you give advice. Number 19 is structure. Um, Structure. So you're giving someone, as a sorcerer, you're giving someone a plan of action, which will then, he says, reduces the chaos in their lives. So think about that in relationships. That is very true, that if you're providing someone structure in life, you are really reducing stress and chaos. It's a huge nutrient. Number 20 is challenge. He says, remember, challenge is more initiated by another person and seldom requested. In other words, the sorcerer needs to initiate challenge versus the sorcee, because the sorcee is never going to, hey, can you challenge me? That's not going to happen. They may seek feedback, but challenge is not going to happen. So this is almost a last last, I forget what it's called. It's almost the last thing you want to go after is challenge, but you don't want someone, he says, you don't want to watch marriages fall apart and all these different things, someone just be heading in a negative direction. You need to step in and challenge. Very grace. There's not grace given when it comes to challenge. Challenge is hard and it's direct, but it must be done very, very wisely. The second to last one here, 21, is development. Development is literally being trained for something. It's a structured growth in some area of your life. So if you think about our systems, giving someone development, giving someone a plan, giving someone, goes back to kind of structure to actually grow in certain areas in their lives. He says this involves focus, information, guidance, experience, goals, and customization. The very last nutrient here is service. So just serving. Didn't have much to say here, but it's just service. Serving someone else, being able to do that is that last nutrient. So let's go on to the final section, which is going to be very fruitful because we're going to talk a little bit about the people that we need to be around. So let's go into the final part here called Who Should Deliver Your Nutrients. Who should deliver your nutrients? So they're all going to start with a C. The first one is coaches. Coaches get the experience, he says. Coaches. So his definition of a coach is one who takes others down a path of growth and competency in a specific area, using conversation, empathy, information, challenge, and life experiences. A coach provides the context that provides out not only the best in a person, but also what is not yet formed in that person. It is a personal and modeling relationship. So coaches provide us with the nutrients we need. So they're pretty much that sorcerer in his language, but in a specific area of life, and perhaps in many instances in a more professional setting. But it can also be very personal as well. So he says, pretty much the idea of why you would need a coach is, why would you spend 10,000 hours trying to master something when you can just find someone who's already mastered it and teach you? That can save you a lot. And so he says coaches need to become competent in certain areas. They have to be competent in connecting. They have to be competent in goal setting, resourcing, questioning, solving underlying obstacles, providing accountability, and then finally measuring. So I just said, personally, that could be a good either tips for template or something we can archive just as a way to look at how to be a coach. And so he says you need to find these coaches, ask around, ask your church, ask your company, inquire with coaching organizations. There's so many around everywhere. But that's the first type of person he says to be around, is frequent meetings with coaches to become better. Here's the second one, and I like this one the most. Comrades, he says, build your life team. So it's the whole concept of a life team. Kind of reminds me of life leadership, the way he talked about it, because he even gives a checklist to go out and how to find a team and then create a team. He says, go through your contact list on your phone, reach out to them, be there for the other person's vulnerability, take a small risk. In other words, when you meet with the person, they could be very vulnerable with you. Listen, then be vulnerable with them, take a small risk, be vulnerable with them, have 2 meetings or more, and then make the invitation. And so what I mean with the invitation, that was kind of the end of the chapter to skip to. Let's move back up to the front end. Is he says that with your life team, you need to have meetings once a week or so. you need to have a meeting. You need to have a meeting where there's some goals involved. There's a check-in involved. There's some very serious, awesome content going on. There needs to be some sharing. There needs to be some work issues, some high lows, ahas at works, different things like that, where you in this team, I believe he says, I'm not sure if I have the number written down, but uh, I think it was 3 to 6 people on a team, or 3 to 8, I believe it was. I can look that up for later. But about 3 to 8 people where you're sharing and you're providing each other nutrients here and there. So he says that the commonality here in comrades is that you both are seeking out growth. So it's really just the three of us is what we're doing, is what he says we need to have with comrades. You need to be vulnerable, have a stance for something, need to share values. You need to. These are the closer people. You can't really. He says you can differ in certain things, but you can't differ in values. You need to believe the same things. So he advocates that you grow your life team. You create a life team of 3 to 8 people. And then the next one is casuals make a great acquaintance. These are your backup team, if you will. These are people you meet with less frequently. Nonetheless, you still enjoy meeting with them. You walk away with energy from those meetings, but they're not your closest friends. They're not that close to you. They're here and there type people, very low commitment, but very enjoyable conversation. He says that's very essential to have that type of person in your life. Then he says it's actually good for these people to have a lot of differences than you, to like different things, to have like different foods, different values, different styles, believe different things, have different personalities. The reason he says this is because our brains crave this novelty. So this allows us, this stretches us to learn different things, to have a different perspective and culture and experiences and things like that. It's very good for our brains and very good for us as a person in general, to be hanging around what he would call casuals. Then you have the colleagues, which is just all about those at your workplace. Being aware, having good relationships at your workplace, your colleagues. Doesn't speak too much about that. Care. So this is the next one, care. Provide for others. So this is really all about I'm providing for someone who's weak. And it doesn't mean they're a weak person, but they may have a weakness and they're not really a comrade to me. They're not a casual, but they're like a student for me. A student who's really in a weak place, struggling with some things. I'm in a care relationship with them. I'm providing. I am the sourcer. They are the sourcee. I am the coach. They are whatever, the trainee or whatever it might be, and they really need a lot of care through loss, through comfort, whatever else it might be. Very important to have those people in your life as well. And then the second to last one here is the chronics. So I liked him talking about this because I think we often neglect this type of stuff, especially in the Christian world. Is significant energy drain these people are the chronics. They have four traits. They have an ongoing struggle, little insight regarding their part in the struggle. Their dysfunctional behavior patterns. They have dysfunctional behavior patterns and have an harmless intent, but harmful in the impact. So they don't mean to be harmful, but they're very harmful in the way that they go about doing things. They're very habitual in negative things. They talk bad all the time. They walk bad all the time. They do bad. These are people you just kind of want to stay away from, he says. You can pray for them, you can love them, but you need to stay away from them. He says you don't judge them because we all have a chronic in us, some type and some sort of chronic in us. So we just need to realize that. But for me, those are the type of people that I try and help and I love and I bless. But when they constantly have the same issues, then in my life, I just tend to just let them go and not worry too much about them. The last one is containment. I don't know what that word is, contaminants or something like that. And these are the people that do intend harm. These are the people that are essentially wicked, and they're trying to be manipulative or hateful or whatever it is. These are people we stay far away from. We learn to love them because we love our enemies, but we have to protect ourselves, and we stay far away from these type of people. So the proposal at the end of this book, like I said, I love the book. I thought it was just, oh man, it was so good. It was even better. So yeah, I think it's a book that we all need to read. Proposal, there's so many different things. I thought that this book could be a flow within itself. Now, I said there's so many things. I'm not going to mention a lot of things. I'm only going to mention two because I want to hear what you guys think as well. But quickly for me, I thought there was the life team concept of creating a life team, meeting with them once a week. I believe that that could be a template, is meeting with your life team to intentionally exchange these nutrients. Um, so yeah, I think that could be it, and that could be that once a week template that we tend to have per system, and then we can think of something else. Maybe it's actively pursue a life team, pray for you, whatever it might be. Some side actions on the other days, and then I also think that we talked about this with just communication with Ezra's 99 tips, is to have a template that would just contain all of these tips, and you can use you can practice different ones. So if there's 22 nutrients, I think it might be good to have a sourcer and a sourcee template where you can be receiving and then be giving certain nutrients. Maybe it's perhaps the ones that you're weakest at, but I think that would just be good conversation. So this was the book People Fuel. I appreciate you guys listening. Look forward to talking about it.